up my lovely panel here, the loveliest panel from Lovelyville. Another one's gone. We're like cats, apparently. What we're going to do today is we kind of, I'm Alan Wright from the Lancashire Wildlife Trust. Some of you may have heard me verbally on the radio in Manchester every so often about all sorts of subjects, like my favourite colour and Strictly Come Dancing, and trying to weave in a wildlife message in there. And the idea of my appearances on there is to actually try and get more and more people involved in nature and understand that they can be involved in nature. And I think we're living in an age where a lot of people, we're talking to people, still don't understand nature, still don't know enough about the nature on the doorsteps and just how important it is for the planet. So what we're going to discuss today is we're going to discuss a couple of projects, ideas, things that I've kind of engaged a diverse group of people which we've not really been able to get to in the past. So I've got Jason, who's the cloud gardener, and he's a major influencer on social media. He'll be introducing himself in a sec. Ellie, who used to work for the Wildlife Trust, but now works for the Manchester Climate Change Agency, and she was heavily involved in the My Wild City campaign, which was a massive, massive success in Manchester. And Kirsty, who's our the Wildlife Trust's Nature and Wellbeing Comms Officer, and she'll be discussing one particular scheme, but also the wider work she's working with. But it's about some greenhouses we've got in Witton Park in Blackburn and how they've been a huge success in engaging people from communities that we don't normally get to. So I'm going to start with Jason, I think. You look surprised.
So, hello everyone, my name is Jason Williams, also known as the Cloud Gardener, and you're probably wondering what on earth is a cloud gardener? It doesn't make sense. Well, actually I am a balcony gardener, and I started gardening on my balcony during lockdown, and it was at that time where all you could do is either go to Aldi or go to B&Q. And so I chose to go to B&Q, and it became one of my daily activities is going to B&Q, and I picked up a couple of plants and I put them out onto my balcony. I have had no gardening experience whatsoever, and I began to notice that the plants I got died. And it was very, very disappointing. And I remember looking through social media, because that's where I get my content from, and was trying to figure out, how do you garden on the balcony? And needless to say, you don't see things like this on Gardener's World. You don't see large balcony gardening content creators out there. So I was trying to use content out there that applied to ground level gardens, and it just wasn't working in my space. And so I decided, okay, let me just figure this out on my own. And I ripped up all of the rule books, and I really put the work in to learn and understand my garden. Before we go any further, I think you should probably see my garden, and then it will all make sense. So this is my balcony garden. It is 18 floors up. It's southwest facing in Manchester city centre. And it, as you can see, is full to the brim of plants. Now, I grow all sorts of herbs and veg. I grow cucumbers, cucamelons, melons, passion fruits, kiwis, tomatoes, chilies, peppers, a climbing variety of spinach called Malabar spinach, and that is growing up along the rose arches. And I even have a fish pond on my balcony, like you do. But interestingly enough, the reason why I have the fish pond is because I use the fish pond water to fertilize my garden. So I try and keep everything as organic as possible on the garden. Not only do I grow a ton of herbs and veg, I also have learned over the past 3 years that I need to incorporate lots of flowers into my garden to attract pollinators. Now, my main pollinator on my garden is not a bee. In fact, I've never even seen a butterfly on my garden. My main pollinators are flies. And so a lot of the planting on my garden is dedicated to attracting flies and my normal pollinators, like moths, onto my garden. And it's, in essence, been a science project. So in 2021, I took my first visit down to the Chelsea Flower Show, and it was an experience. Chelsea is an experience. That was my very first flower show, and it was very, very expensive. You see these show gardens, and they're worth £250,000. And this happened to be the very first year that there were balcony gardens at Chelsea. So I was perplexed because there were really beautiful designs, but there were some that had giant oak trees on the balconies. There were some that had grass growing up through pavements on the balconies. And what I didn't know at the time is that show gardens are, in essence, works of art. Whereas for me, I wanted to see art and reality. So I decided that in my wisdom, I was going to design a garden at Chelsea. And so I put together this garden, and the color scheme was based off the sunset that you see here on the left-hand side. And then the elements of the arches are essentially replicas of my garden. So the vast amount of the planting that I had got onto this garden was all from Chawton Plant Nursery, which is a local nursery. And the idea behind the garden was to show that if you were young, lived in a city, didn't drive, and could only access a local garden centre like B&Q or Chawton Plant Nursery, you could still create a garden. I heard nothing back from the RHS, so I thought, oh well, I tried. Turns out I got through, and I had to make a garden at Chelsea. So this is my show garden at Chelsea. It's called the Cirrus Garden. I had the opportunity to meet the Queen. She was very infused with the garden. The first thing she did say when I did meet her was, "I do quite like your roses," which I found quite charming. And this garden ended up winning a silver gilt medal. So just really quickly, the back wall of this garden was blank. And the reason why it was blank, it was white. Everybody else's gardens were painted. They had shelves on. I'm a renter. And so this is the reality for most renters in the towns and cities. You can still create a beautiful garden without drilling into walls. You can still get vertical height. You can still have a visual impact even as a renter. I then have forayed into garden design. So I work with urban developers, and I show them what they can do and how they can approach people, and show them how to create green spaces. So right here, we've got 3 different balconies on the 35th floor in Croydon, and they each have different themes. One is an edible garden, one is a minimal garden, and then I have a garden that is dedicated to attracting biodiversity. And interestingly enough, there were still hoverflies visiting the 35th floor. Here's a look at some of the wildlife on my 18th floor balcony garden. Let's start off over at the fish pond. When I tap the sides, the fish know that it's time to be fed. And so do the snails. Let's get a closer look. That is so cool. This spider chose the most ridiculous place to make a web. This is just a brief snippet of some of the wildlife that I have in my garden. But it just goes to show you just how important a small space garden can be. For example, I have these worms, but I didn't introduce them. But now they're breeding on my balcony. So just imagine if there were more small space gardeners in our towns and cities. I created a social media platform, so I have a TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. And what I've had to learn is how do I engage people? And one of the things, essentially picking back off some of the conversations earlier, is how do I actually reach people? And I don't tend to use words like biodiversity or things like that. I show people this, and people then understand how their own spaces can then go on to affect biodiversity. This year, I also went off across the Northwest to go and visit lots of different alleyways. And that was because I had the task of creating the RHS feature garden at the Tatton Park Flower Show this year. This was an alley garden, and in the Northwest, it is something that we see a lot of. I was going to relocate this garden to Moss Side in Manchester. The reason being is I wanted this garden to, rather than it just being a fancy show garden, I wanted it to have some form of reality. I wanted it to go to a community and get some use out of it, which meant that I had to really focus in then on what it was that I was delivering to the community. So in the design, I incorporated things like greenhouses, cold frames, seed collecting stations. The labeling of the plants all along the alleyway are labeled in both English and Arabic, as there's a really high level of refugees and asylum seekers in the area. I gave this garden to the community because they've been gardening for 5 years, and as you can see, they've made an absolutely fantastic start. They just needed help. The other thing that was really important to me was that it wasn't just some fancy PR exercise. I offered my services to the community, so I'm also mentoring them for the next 12 months. So here we are at Tatton Park. This garden is 40 meters long. I never knew 40 meters was huge until I got there and they measured it out. And I think this is the part where I cried after taking this photo. And here is the garden all finished. But interestingly enough, I was able to create spaces. So as you can see, I was using bathtubs as planters. That semicircle structure there looks really, really fancy. It's a trampoline. And it's about showing the community that even if you don't have money to buy loads of fancy containers, you can still upcycle, recycle, and use whatever you can to make a space. You'll see I was visited by All Saints Catholic School. Well, each month I host a houseplant and seed swap event, and some of these children, they came along to my event. They decided to grow some of the seeds in their gardening club, and I used some of their plants, well, in fact, all of the plants that they grew. I then picked them up from school and then brought them over to the alleyway and incorporated them into the design. And what you see here is them coming up to visit me on press day. And I think one of my proudest moments was them seeing the sign for their school, and they turned around to Miss and said, "Miss, we're famous." I mean, how cool is that? Here's the garden relocated in its new home in Moss Side, and as you can see, the community are using it. The garden also looks beautiful at nighttime. You can see I created lots of social pockets. So we've got seating areas, we have a bar. It brings the community together. And with the solar lighting, they're now able to use this garden for even longer. This is how the garden started originally, or the alleyway. And after the relocation, you'll see there's a slight difference. Interestingly enough, there was no biodiversity on this alley. It was very few and far between. So I'm very grateful to the Mayor's Office and to the GMCA for naming me a local nature champion as part of the local nature recovery strategy. And I will be doing my best to try and encourage more people to turn over these grey spaces and make them green. Thank you.
So, yeah, hard act to follow, but thanks, Jason. I'm Kirsty Tyler, and I work for Lancashire Wildlife Trust. As Alan said, I am Nature and Wellbeing Communications Officer. So we have a fantastic nature and wellbeing service with Lancashire Wildlife Trust. We get people into nature to help with their mental health. It's been running since 2016 now, and it's just growing every year and just being absolutely fantastic. We've helped so many people with their mental health through getting them into nature. And I'm talking specifically today about one aspect of that, which is the greenhouse project. which is in Blackburn with Darwen at Witton Country Park. So, realistically, the greenhouse project kind of kicked off in 2020. We had already been working in Witton Park with Myerscough College, doing some nature and wellbeing sessions. So Ellie actually used to work on this project, and there's Ellie there. She'll be talking in a few minutes. And a lot of the work we'd been doing with Myerscough had been actually next to these abandoned greenhouses in Witton Park. So they had been built in the 70s. They'd been used to grow bedding plants by Blackburn with Darwen Council. This is them, lovely drone image. And Andy, who had been running the sessions in Witton Park, really just thought that these were a missed opportunity. They had been shut for 10 years at this point, locked up. They were mostly fine inside, bit of rubbish and stuff, but the main issue was asbestos tables that were, you know, a massive issue. And before we could think about working in there, we really had to get rid of those. So this is what they looked like. Some of the you know, mess that had to be cleared up. And these were the asbestos tables that needed to be got rid of. So what we did with that was to hold a crowdfunder campaign, which went really well. We got the funding for it, and then Suez came in and got rid of the asbestos tables for us, allowing us to actually sort of put forward our plan in bringing these greenhouses back to life and being able to hold wellbeing sessions and make it a bit of a community hub in Blackburn. So we were supported by the council and Active Blackburn with Darwen, who really, you know, wanted us to be able to get local people a bit more active, get them out of the house in some cases. You know, for some people, even just walking from the car park to the greenhouses would be a step up in their activity for that day. So, you know, we were really well supported in this, which was absolutely fantastic. We weren't even sure we'd get one greenhouse back up and running, but we actually managed to get 5 of them going, which was absolutely incredible and a real testament to the amazing volunteers who turn up week on, week out to sort these out. And it's given people a real sense of ownership over the greenhouses. They feel like it's theirs, they feel pride, and that's why they keep turning up week after week, because it's their space. It's not something that we give to them, it is theirs. So it's a beautiful place now. You walk in, it's green, it's lush. You walk in and you just immediately feel just kind of peaceful and just chilled, because you're just surrounded by all this beautiful greenery. And, you know, it's, like I said, there's a real community of people, and we're, you know, making sure that people are getting fresh food, because they come volunteer at the greenhouses. They then take some of the food back with them, which is fantastic. And it's become a bit of a hub for Blackburn with Darwen's Food Alliance group. And, you know, we do shared events with other local groups, and then feeding a bit of that nature-based activity into that to really bring it back to a bit of that conservation discussion. And so this was Good to Grow Day this year, which we held lots of different local groups who do food growing in the area. We gave them tours of the greenhouse, and they all had stalls, and local people came to chat. So that was fantastic. And, you know, we've done all sorts of things. We've held bike workshops, and like I said, people get to take home the food they grow. So it's also making sure that people know where their food comes from and have access to good food. And this is a community composting that we're doing now. So this was it when the compost actually got delivered, but that's now a resource for Blackburn with Darwen as well, that people can access if they want it. So that's one of our staff members, Tom and Fraser, who actually took the drone footage earlier. getting stuck in, getting all that compost ready for everyone. A lot of the success with the greenhouse project has been feet on the ground communication. So this is Andy, who's really led on the project, and a lot of the stuff we've done is due to him just going and talking to people, and then traditional comms kind of supporting that. And the big part of this is that the groups of people that Andy has talked to have been a diverse group of people, and it's led to the Greenhouse Project being recognised locally as being really exceptional for engaging a really diverse population. So over the last 12 months, like 60% of the people who have engaged with the Greenhouse Project have been from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups, which is twice as high as the population of those people in Blackburn with Darwen, which is only 30%. So we are being recognised as somewhere that is safe and a place where people can go and engage with us and feel that, you know, we are a welcoming space for that. And, you know, some of that has been just the kind of events we've done as well. So we've done things like last Christmas, we held a winter solstice event rather than a Christmas event. So that immediately opens that out to a lot more people than just being a Christmas event. It's something that's open for anyone. And we had folk music and we had lights and, you know, it was all just a lovely thing. And then things like we held an iftar event for Ramadan last year. So local community came down, nature walk, prayer all together in the greenhouses, and then breaking their fast together. And you know, things like that have just really worked in the community. Like I said, you know, we've had some traditional comms as well, supporting what Andy's been doing with his feet on the ground stuff. So we've made a web page so that if people hear about us, they have somewhere to go and find us online. We did a video 18 months on from the crowdfunder to update people, which was really nice because we had some of the same people on the video 18 months on from the original one, and it showed the confidence and the change that they felt from being involved in this project. And things like as well, just how to get to the Greenhouse Project video. We did a little film, someone just walking, and it's just to remove the barrier of anxiety for people with, you know, mental health problems, how to actually get there. Like I said, we've done loads of different events, like the iftar event for Ramadan, which was really well attended, and everyone had a great time. This is a group of Ukrainian families that we've been hosting as well. So, you know, they found it really good to get out into nature in a country that they don't know and they've just suddenly ended up in. And this was the solstice event that I was talking about, which was really, really lovely and just like lots of happiness. So the learning we've got really from the greenhouses is how important community is in what we do with getting our nature and wellbeing sessions out there. And, you know, one of these has been that we've ended up with community engagement officers on our kind of offshoot project, the Bay, and also in our Nature for Health project in Phillips Park, which was a test and learn site with the NHS for green social prescribing. So we're giving people the option of not just coming to us for wellbeing sessions, we're going to any one of these groups, and we've kind of managed that and got more of a community feel around it. And through talking to different people, it's also been really good to give Lancashire Wildlife Trust kind of access to a different audience as well, and give us the opportunity to reach a community that we wouldn't normally reach. So this was like the first meeting of the Darwen Moor peatland restoration at the greenhouses, and you know, it's people that might not usually come to a talk like that, but because it's somewhere they feel safe, they've really felt you know, that they can come to that, and they are getting involved in more conversations than they usually would. And yeah, it's a great place. It's doing great work, and it's helping us to be in in a more diverse area and talk to a different group of people that we wouldn't if this didn't exist. Even things like, inviting middle managers from Lancashire Wildlife Trust to a local mosque, and then reiterating that by them coming out to Brockholes Nature Reserve, and things like that. And it's just a great place, and I think I love it. I love it. So yeah, I think that's me.
Thank you, Kirsty. One thing I really do enjoy about Andy's parties is he always arranges for this great big tub of curry and a great big tub of rice. And I'm embarrassed to admit I went back 6 times. The last time we went, this is why I've put so much weight on. Right, we're going to start now with Ellie. Ellie was, as I say, she was the comms officer on the Lancashire Wildlife Trust, but she worked a lot in Greater Manchester. She was a huge driver behind the Manchester Festival of Nature for the last 3. She kind of, I think, when did you leave the trust?
When did I leave the trust? March.
March. She left in March, and she left us. She really left us in the lurch for the Festival of Nature. But her legacy lived on because the 3 previous ones, Ellie almost single-handedly sorted everything out with the help of all the partners that we've got. And she actually arranged for us to have a better partnership to work with. Anyway, during that period, she was also working on My Wild City, which was an exceptional project. And I just wonder if you'd like to explain a little bit about what all that was about.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, you can hear me. So my name's Ellie. I used to work at the Lancashire Wildlife Trust for about 5 years, and I now work at the Manchester Climate Change Agency. And yeah, so the My Wild City project was a project which was based in Manchester. It was all around individual actions, it was around people's gardens, it was around the wildlife on their doorsteps. And working on that project during the pandemic was just a truly kind of fascinating time. You cast your mind back to the pandemic. I mean, that's when you started your cloud garden, wasn't it? And it was a time where our gardens and our parks and the birds that we could see out of our windows were the only things we had. And so we started getting more and more kind of questions about what am I seeing. We started to see this kind of huge growth in engagement on our social media channels and around, in particular, kind of the work that My Wild City was doing, because it was about gardens. You couldn't visit our nature reserves, most people couldn't, because they lived in Manchester, they couldn't leave. And so we thought, right, this is a great moment. We need to kind of capture the energy around what's happening right now. And so we launched a survey called Valuing Nearby Nature. And the response was huge. I think we had about 2,000 people take part or over. And it was something like 99% of respondents said that, that they truly kind of had valued nature so much more now than they used to. They were spending much more time in their local park than they used to, and they felt much more connected to nature now during the pandemic than they used to. And so what a kind of great moment in time that was for wildlife.
So that 99% response, I mean, was that something you expected?
No. I mean, yeah, it's a huge number, isn't it? I think I expected for the number to be quite high, that people valued nature more now than they used to, talking about the pandemic times. But yeah, to see that was kind of, just really like, wow, isn't our work so important?
So My Wild City also did quite a lot of work on the ground as well, didn't it, with getting into people's gardens?
Yes, it did, yeah. So we worked with kind of lots of community groups on the ground and with schools and, just all sorts of loveliness, visiting libraries. And yeah, it was a really wonderful kind of time.
And would you think that this type of project would be good across the country, or would it only work in Manchester?
No, I think it could work. I think it could work anywhere. I don't think it's particularly about the place that My Wild Garden happened that made it important. But I think kind of going back to the survey and how people responded to the survey, I think that was very much about time and the time that it was in. And I would be really fascinated for a similar survey to be done now that we're out of the pandemic. Do people still feel connected to nature? Are people still are they still spending time in their gardens? Are they still going to their parks as much as they used to? Or kind of have we kind of forgotten potentially the lessons that the pandemic taught us?
So now you've moved on to the Manchester Climate Change Agency.
Yes.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about your work there?
Yep, so I'm the communications officer at the Manchester Climate Change Agency. The agency itself is all around kind of catalysing climate action in Manchester, reporting on Manchester's emissions, setting science-based targets for the city and recommendations. And in particular, I focus on In Our Nature, which is a programme that the Climate Change Agency is the lead partner on, but we work with a whole host of fantastic partners, including Hubbub, Groundwork, Amity, the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research, Manchester City Council, and that's kind of our arm that we use to talk about the individual actions that people can take to reduce their carbon emissions. And so it's a really interesting project to work on, because kind of how do you talk about a problem like the climate crisis? You know, if you kind of go into the theory of talking about the climate crisis and inspiring action, there's something that I stumbled across quite early on that kind of I really resonated with, which was about something called the climate silence spiral, which is quite hard to say, but it's all about how people really care. Of course they care about climate change, of course they care about nature, but they feel scared to talk about it. Particularly with climate change, they feel scared to talk about it because very quickly the conversation can become very scientific, or it can become very politically charged. And people feel that because of that, they just don't want to talk about it, even though they care about it. And it's so important that we talk about climate change. And so something that the In Our Nature programme does really well is it makes the climate conversation a really fun, positive one. Please do go look at our website and our social media channels. You'll see how kind of colourful everything is. You'll see the kind of playful language that we use. You'll see that oftentimes we aren't actually talking about climate change. We're talking about food, we're talking about fashion. We're taking the conversation to people where they're at, and then using that kind of initial engagement to get people more involved down the line in kind of talking about climate change. Another thing that the programme does really well is that we work with community groups on the ground to kind of co-design actions and projects that they can take that are really achievable and replicable across the city, so that hopefully people can go to In Our Nature and they can see, oh, there's a person doing this thing, and I could maybe go and take that idea and do this thing with my community. So that's something that we kind of really want to focus on through the programme.
Kirsty, you're also involved in a lot of other nature for health schemes as part of the project.
Mm-hmm.
Is this getting people to, are people getting involved in this just to benefit their health, or are they actually getting involved in nature as well? Are you actually seeing people getting involved in the natural world a little bit more as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think once they've kind of been introduced to this as a way to help their mental health, they're then taking this home, and then they're realising that this is a longer journey for them, and that this getting out and helping others is a big thing, and they get really interested in the conservation side of it. You know, they'll go out on their own to do a litter pick on the beach, or they'll go and, you know, do some bird spotting, or they'll even just, you know, getting out and using iNaturalist on their phone or something. But yeah, they very quickly realise how important nature is for not just themselves, but everyone, the whole community.
And my final question today is for Jason, who I've told him a number of times that he's been an inspiration for a lot of people who obviously don't think that they can garden because they've got too small a space, or because they're 30 floors up, or something like that. But are you surprised, or were you surprised at the kind of reach you've had? Because it's not just Manchester, is it? You are quite well known across the country, aren't you?
I think I have been surprised, but I think for me, it's being able to share these relatable stories from this one garden. So on my social media, I'm really quite open and honest with the fact that I do struggle with anxiety and depression. And so the whole purpose of my garden was helping me through lockdown. And I know we all went through a stage of being in lockdown and it feeling dreadful, but if I'm being really honest, I loved it. I loved being back in this one little space. And one of my biggest concerns was, oh, well, what happens when furlough is over and we go back to work? And, we had all of these amazing WhatsApp groups in our corporate jobs supporting us. And as soon as everything went back to normal, all of that mental health support just dropped. And I was like, wow, this is not cool. And so I made that decision then to stay and focus on gardening and make that my primary career. But just, I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, I was lucky enough to speak at a pre-COP28 event, and it was all about urban greening and creating greener cities, which is my task for 2024, is to make some of our cities greener. And I get to speak or get to attend lots of events similar to this, and you hear things like biodiversity net gain, you hear all of these wonderful things, and I sit there and I'm like, well, that just sounds like greenwashing to me. But how can we, sorry, people. So how do we then make this justifiable? How do we hold developers to account? Because for most of these developers, you cannot, if we're being honest, it's all about profit. So how do we get them to understand that making a green space might not be financially profitable, but is profitable for the people who live in their properties? So that is my task for 2024.
Well, that wasn't a controversial end, was it?
Here's what it is.
One other thing that me and Jason sometimes disagree on is alleyway isn't an alleyway, it's a ginnel. It's a ginnel. So now we want some questions from the audience. Do we have any online?
Yeah, we just have a question for Jason online. If we could do that.
We've got a question for Jason online, but I refuse to accept there are no questions that are not being asked in the room. So I'm going to walk around with the microphone. So we'll take the online question, and hands up if you want to ask any questions.
So just 2 quite fun questions for Jason, which is, when you were sort of reinstalling the alleyway garden back in, were any of the community or residents sort of part of that process? And did they help you sort of put it back together? Were they involved at all? And also a practical question, any tips for creating a fish pond on a balcony?
So with the alleyway garden, if I'm being super honest, it started off, the conversation about the design started off in a very RHSE way, being very, very fancy. And it wasn't until I went and did this walk around at the Northwest and went and visited loads of different alleys that I then began to realize that is not what these people do. And so I then realized that once I've pre-allocated it to Moss Side, to this community, it then transcended being a boring show garden. It was about the community. So all the way down the alleyway, there were different types of borders with different colors. Some people wanted herbs, some people wanted veg. And so what I ended up having to do is do around about 4 or 5 consultations with the community for them to give me the feedback of what it is that they wanted so that they could be invested in the garden. And I remember leaving some of these consultations thinking, what the hell have I done? But now that it is back on site, everyone is so invested in it. They're keeping up to it. I only have to visit once a month to do like a little workshop, but it is looking fantastic. And it's because they are invested, because they were consulted all the way through. And in terms of a fish pond, go to my YouTube channel, as I have 3 or 4 different videos on it. But in essence, I just use a half whiskey barrel, and I've planted it up. And yeah, check out my website or my YouTube channel.
Hi, I just wondered if any of the panel had any tips for helping people to deal with eco-anxiety, and how we can use our communications channels to try and help with that.
Yeah, so climate anxiety, I mean, I think probably everyone in the room has probably suffered with it at some point, because the problem feels so huge and we all feel so small in that problem. And we think, well, just going back to like me, I won't tell you what you think, but I sometimes feel like, oh my God, this problem is so big. Is me cycling to work going to make a difference? So I think that the thing that we can do as communicators, and kind of the thing that maybe brings it back to the theme of this Communicate conference, is this like together for nature, this feeling of togetherness. And so I think it's really important in our comms that we showcase that you're not just one person doing one small thing, you are part of a movement. However, I don't think at the moment, and I think it's something that I'd love to kind of discuss more today, I don't really feel like maybe that we've achieved that yet, honestly. I found the question at the start of today's discussions a really hard one to answer, about kind of a time that you've felt authentically part of a movement. I was thinking like, well, I don't really know. I certainly know a lot of people that think like I do, but I don't maybe feel part of a movement as such. And I think that's kind of a challenge for us as communicators to kind of come together and kind of address that, because we need a movement.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a similar thing of, yeah, it's really difficult as an individual to not get eco-anxiety and not think that you're doing enough. But I think for me personally, the biggest thing this year has been letting myself off the hook a bit. Like I'm recycling like 80 to 90% of my waste already. You know, I'm doing as much as I can. So not beating myself up if I do, you know, put something in the general waste or something. And just being kind to myself, I think, has been a big thing, and realizing that I'm doing as much as I possibly can, but it is not down to me to do everything. It is down to all of us, but then bigger than that, it is down to these, you know, huge corporations who are doing much more bad stuff than we as little individuals are. So yeah, letting myself off the hook and realizing that the picture is a bit bigger. Not that that really helps with the anxiety of knowing that you can't change that, but I think just being kind to myself has been a big thing for me with the eco-anxiety.
I think personally, social media is great. Obviously, I've been able to use it as a platform to do amazing things, but there's also a really nasty side of social media. And in particular, for me, one of the things that I really dislike at the moment is the weaponization of the word wokery, how it's changed. And so it's now a way to kind of dismantle all of the good things in the world by making it sound evil and different. And so going back to what I was saying in my talk, rather than making things heavy, I think what I've tried to do is relay stories. So you look at the alleyway garden, you see all the things that we've achieved with the alleyway garden. Sharing those stories, I think, is a way of people to kind of understand biodiversity and climate change in different ways, making it more relatable to them, because I think as a society we've kind of lost empathy. I think people need to experience things for themselves to then understand, oh wow, this is actually important. So going back to Ellie's project, if people then start to figure out what's going on in their garden, as gardeners, you start to then care more about climate, you start to care more about recycling, all of these different things, the insects coming into your garden. So I think it's just relaying stories, I think, is the best way to kind of defeat that.
So we've just got time for one really, really short question.
it's not a question, it's just on that. I'm from Bradford, and we do a lot of work with young children. And I think with regards to climate change, it's kind of working with young children in particular around the education side of things, and also exposure to nature, especially young children who live in cities who don't have access and don't really know what climate change is. And it's the language that we use as well, and not making it too scary, and making it comfortable for them, and starting on a small scale in schools, in the playground, in the park, on the way to school, the little things that they can do. And as they grow, that will grow as well. And I think a lot of it is down to the education and the language that we use.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there is a nervousness, and I think projects like the ones we've heard about kind of help people to get over that nervousness of why they should be involved in nature, and why they should be saving the planet and doing their own little bits.
Thinking about like what we've done at the greenhouse, the food growing has been very much an entry point for people to get into nature who wouldn't have normally been involved in nature. And so, much like using the right language and getting people involved when they're young, it's been, getting adults who wouldn't have been involved. We bring them to the greenhouse, they can grow themselves some food, and then we start introducing those nature conversations, and then they're carrying that back out into their community, and the message is reaching wider. So, yeah.
Right, we're going to wind it up there. I think that's been a really good discussion, and I hope you all agree. So can we thank Ellie, Kirsty and Jason for their fantastic input this afternoon, and I still think it's a ginnel. And I can hear everybody's tummies rumbling, so let's get downstairs and have something to eat. We're going down to the Circle Bar.